Hi, my name is Ross Allmark, and I'm the Vice President for Transformations at Vice Media Group. We've been using Workfront for 2.5 years now, I believe, across largely focused inside our creative agency, which is called Virtue. We use it basically for project management, budget management, the tracking of hours, for managing timelines and proofing, and we also have integrated it with a lot of our other systems as well for various purposes. This is my AtApp video today. It is my first, and I'm going to tell you about the AFA burn report solution.
Okay, so I will be your, I'll just drive for you. And if you want to just sing out where you'd like me to click and point, let's just run it that way.
Yeah, got it. So I guess you mean that the first two tabs here, if we were to look at the select report, we're always running the AFA burn report there, so there's no action generally required.
Yeah, in future, we may have some other groovy, graphical versions and so forth to choose from. So this is really just a placeholder tab for now.
Exactly. And then project filter is kind of basically the same. We filter on the current project. We go into the date section, and, dates are important in this. When we start up, generally we want to encapsulate the whole of the project. So as default, the dates are 1 year before and 2 years after the plan start.
Yeah,
dates,
pretty wide both. Yep.
Exactly. But we may, dates become a little bit more important further down the line if you want to do some analysis of things. But we'll always start with just that broad encapsulating date period. Then we have the settings tab over here. Firstly, you've got your page layout. Thank you for adding that, Doug. That's neat. So you can fit the PDF page to the size of the report that's returning, which is just good practice. Then we start getting to some really material stuff that is important. We've got the show USD section here. Now, as default, we view everything in USD, even though we have 14 different currencies in our system and 14 different offices, just because that tends to be the universal language for comparing stuff. But it is also useful for people to view things in the currency of the Workfront project, which can be any one of those 14. So sometimes they're going to want to remove the USD checkbox there.
Right. And if I could interject, doing so then forces the report to retrieve the current exchange rate from within Workfront and apply that to the number so that you can switch between currencies.
Yeah, exactly, which is really useful. Then we have moving there, you can view it as the total, so you're just looking at the report for the totality, and then it breaks down by department, roles, and users. A couple of, I guess, important notes on that. The department section, we are actually leveraging the description field of job roles there. Note to Workfront, they need to make their job roles a little bit more robust, so we don't have to jerry-rig these things, if they'd be so kind. Then we can view it by the role or by the user. It is important for this to have a good rate card figured out inside the system. Rate card structure has been a big focus for us to try and get right. Both, it's been challenging, frankly, to fit it into the current system due to the limitations of the job role object. But this allows us to view across those three very important tiers, which are really the sort of actionable views for any project owner. Like for us, we're a creative agency, so you're looking, okay, the department, what has the whole creative team burned on this, is almost as important as looking at what specific roles or users have done. And then you get a view report to generate the thing.
Yeah. And I will mention here, while it grabs the data, that what it's doing is grabbing not only the Workfront baseline information, but the baseline plus information. Ross's sportier term than the advanced baseline I was calling it. And so it grabs everything necessary from back in time to be able to do these delta comparisons right down to the task assignee rate level. So, okay, I will zoom this in. If you can cast your judgment on where you think a good level of how's that to then speak to the margin summary, and I can just pan around at your discretion.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah. So starting with the margin summary. So this is a really good top line of where this project's at, right? And the really important part of it is the margin percentage at the end. That's the thing that matters to any professional services business. Before we get there, it's worth understanding and just confirming three concepts, and that's the approved, the forecast, and the actuals. The approved is what's in your baseline plus. For us, that means approved by finance, because we have prohibited the creation and management of baseline only to our finance FP&A teams. So only they can say what is approved. And it is a snapshot of what is in the project plan at the moment of approval. The next is forecast, and that is based on planned hours in the project plan. And then the final is actuals, which is based on hours tracked against the project plan. There's also a notion in there as well of expenses, just in the middle. If you are using expense management inside Workfront, that will give you planned and actuals expenses based on what you put in the project section.
I read in your quick guide that you're going to be using an integration to feed those in from another system in your case, correct?
Yeah, we're using Workfront Fusion. We're going to be syncing the Workfront projects to what's in our ERP. So bringing over just a big list of costs. And again, it's really just giving people visibility. It won't write back to NetSuite. It will just be pulling, this is actually what we have in the system if all your POs and all of that stuff goes through.
Right.
So then moving with those sort of concepts unpacked, moving from left to right, we start with the price to client. That comes over from our sales force. How much did we sell this thing for, this project for? Then we have a total number of hours, so the gross number of hours, the cost of those hours, expenses we've mentioned. Then we go into the total cost, which is the hours cost plus expenses, a gross margin, so what is the margin figure in cash terms, and finally that margin is a percentage. And for most professional services businesses, they're going to be looking at that percentage very closely to try and understand where this project is actually going to lie. And everyone has different thresholds on what that margin amount should be. In this case, it is calculated largely on the difference, and you have to understand between the cost rate of a user or a job role and what their billable rate is. So that is really a function of that kind of difference in there and the markup that's made on hours. Although I should say I wish the margin percentage we're seeing in this project plan here reflected what our business was currently getting, but sadly it does not. That would be a business that I would very much like to run.
Ross, I've just noticed because I tested that new Baseline Plus feature that I added last night, the approved and forecast match because I took a brand fresh baseline last night. So if you don't mind, because I think it'll be a little more interesting, I'll just pop to a task. We'll go into Gantt chart mode. I'll drag something a little bit longer, this will demonstrate the real-time nature of what we were talking about earlier.
Hell yeah.
So let's find a couple of things that aren't yet done, like these last couple of things. This project happens to be close to completion. So I'll grab this little guy here if I can. Whoop, there we go. Stretch that out. Let that bounce back onto its subordinate. Maybe drag that one out a little as well. And I'll, to give it some impact, I'll also change the hour estimate on here to 160. Let's say that's out of control. This step is going to take a little bit longer. We'll go to 50 hours.
Scope creep there.
Yeah, sometimes happens at the tail end. I will hit view report again. And now that I've changed the plan, we should see some variance, albeit relatively minor because we're at the tail end of the project versus the baseline that's in play right now. So just trying to mock up a, true story.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, take two. Let's zoom in on here.
And so we covered the margin section of it, right? That's pretty comprehensive, I think.
Yeah, and now you can see there's a little bit of variation. We've gone, because of those two changes that I made, the hours are a little higher, and the cost, of course, is a little higher too. So where do you go next usually in your demo?
I think move along to the summary comparison.
Okay, over to the right. And if I didn't tell you this trick, Ross, it's a gooder. If you click into the image, you can then use your arrows, so you don't have to scroll all over the place.
Handy.
Which is handy.
Nice. Okay, so selected detail versus summary. This is where the date range element of this comes in. Now, one of the things that's very handy with this is when you have your actuals and your forecast with your planned hours and what was approved, all of those hours are timestamped right down to the day in the way that we do this. And when you compare, when you look at a specific period, it's just going to give you the planned hours, actual hours, and approved hours for that period, say if that's week 22. Right. So if we were to zoom this in on, say, week 22, using that dates, what you would then be able to do is compare it to the margin summary, because the margin summary never changes. That's always the same, because obviously that's looking at things in the totality, but everything in your hours, which is below, and in this is going to change. You can then use the percentages here, your hours cost and percentages, to compare the summary to what's in your more narrowed in view, and it will tell you, for example, how many of the hours and how many of the costs are taking place within the window that you've selected. That's just handy to get a sense of how things are breaking across time and just give you another view of comparisons of costs and hours.
Okay, I won't bother running that because we're of course we've gone long, but
always
straightforward. And then
so we'll hammer through the meat down here. I think that this is where the real action is in the report. Obviously your margins and stuff are wonderful, but you can get them elsewhere. It's quite easy calculations. This is the bit that's a lot harder and a lot more meaningful for how people are actually going to make decisions. So firstly, you have this grouped by, in your left going down vertically, you have things grouped by your totals, then you have your departments, your roles, and your users, and they all roll up into one another. So you can look at those different views depending on what you need to know. Then starting to move across to the left, firstly, in the approved section, you've got a summary of what was in your baseline. So you've got the hours and the hours costs. We also use the internal rate. So we're understanding what the internal rate of those roles were on an hourly basis when that was approved. And those rates, importantly, roll up into the departments. And that's useful because the choices you make inside a department about whether a task is done by someone more senior or someone more junior, it's really helpful to reflect their impact on the overall average hourly rate for that particular team. Then moving forward into the forecast, this is going to give you your planned hours. So this is looking at whether it's for the whole project or for a period that you've selected, the planned hours that are in the current plan, which has been maintained by your project owner. So this should be, in an ideal case, the most accurate version of what they think has happened and will happen. But obviously, in reality, that's not always reflected. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in future as we move through this. The next section here is scope creep. So this is going to tell us basically when your plan is exceeding what was approved, both in terms of total cost and the percentage. Now, this is really when, as we all know, when changes are made inside a project, people start adding things to the plan. Now, if a project owner just starts throwing extra hours in their plan to try and solve problems or adds a bunch of additional tasks that exceed what was approved, the first information you're going to get about that is the scope creep element here. Now, for those of you that use Workfront for the planning, for resource planning as well, this is really important because we have our project owners update their resourcing needs on a weekly basis and we check them. So if they're saying, hey, in order to realize this, I need an extra 100 hours of creative directors to get this job done, you're going to immediately see that change reflected in this scope creep here. And it's one of your best early warning signs that good decisions aren't being made. If you're overseeing this project, if you are the project owner themselves, they're going to be able to go, okay, I've got scope creep, I'm going to need to make cuts elsewhere. So that's the sort of first actionable insight you see as you move through this. Then moving along to the next section, if you'd be so kind, Doug. This is the actual. So for us, this is what has been tracked against the project. So this is the cold, hard reality of what each user and department is logging against the project. Pretty self-explanatory, works in the same way as the other sections. It's a rolled up internal rate plus hours and the hours costs. Then moving into sort of more insightful stuff. So this is going to take what was approved and deduct from that what people have actually done. So you can see as in totality what is left of what was approved. So you know, for example, if you approved 1,000 hours and you burnt through 800 of them, it's going to say, hey, you have only got 20% of your approved hours left. And if there's 60% of the project left, then again, that is going to be a bit of a warning sign to anyone looking at this closely.
And this is where we originally thought we would stop, but then in speaking to your other colleagues, realize maybe there's one more step we could take, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we thought it would go just as far as that. And that was really, as far as the Workfront report went, the utilization report, which was our jumping off point. But when we did some testing with this, what we actually realized is that we needed to make a bit more of a projection about the future that people could really believe in and was trustworthy. And now for us, basically the most trustworthy projection was going to come from what has been tracked on timesheets to date. So that is approved by the manager of the individual, etc. And they have logged, this is what I really did. And they are not incentivized to lie there. So we know that there's a bit of a wisdom of crowds situation. So they're going to put that in there. But what we're going to want to do is then match that to the future hours from the plan. So on one hand, you've got a pretty validated and robust idea of the past, and you're marrying that to a projection of the future, which the project owner is very invested in being correct because that is the hours that are on our resource plan. So if they've booked 100 creative hours into the future, they're actually going to need that. So we always have, I think, a great degree of sort of confidence in what's on a project plan in the future for that. Whereas, they might not be reflecting in their project plan all the changes that happened in the past, just because they've forgotten to say, oh, well, actually, we needed less last week in the end, but they've tracked it on the actuals. So we can kind of disregard that. So it was very important for us to be able to marry the sort of validated past with the best guess at the future together to get our projected landing point. And that is going to be probably the most viewed section of this report by most of our stakeholders. Where does it look like we're going to land? That's the thing people are really very interested in.
Yeah, great. If I could use that as an opportunity, thank you for zipping through that so succinctly, Ross. I'm going to put in looking at the numbers I've got there, I'm going to put in a hurdle rate of 20,000 or a delta cutoff, and just for fun, go up a level and show just the role and rerun the report to illustrate how a PM might first choose to come in here and sort of take a high level view of their project to then find their way to the points of interest. So looking just at the roles, I see nothing red if I make my delta cutoff 20,000. But if I lower it to 10,000, which is good, no surprises more than, well, there were some good surprises there where we were under by more than 20. But if I now increase that to 10, I think I should be able to see some red show up, which then would lead to some of those creative management questions that, how are we going to make back in this department the scope creep that has emerged? And that's where you start asking PMs to swap in less expensive resources for more expensive ones, or perhaps shaving some time down. Are those the main techniques that you use to stay on track with this?
Yeah, it would be moving the resources around, or
Mhm.
like say, hey, you don't have as much time to do this as you would like, because obviously there's natural pressure from the people doing the work to say, hey, if you're a creative, the more time the better, right? And it's important to keep people disciplined and say, actually, no, here is a reasonable amount. You can't have another 20 hours on this.
Yeah.
So it's those kind of decisions that tend to get made.
Thank you so much, Ross. This is once again, you've exceeded my expectations for these calls. I really appreciate it.
Lovely. Thanks, Doug. Take care, mate.
Yeah, cheers.
Bye.
Bye.